Welcome to Pebbles of Light. I'm your host, Ann Maxon. Have you ever felt a bit lost during the dark times of life's challenges? I know I have. I'm so grateful for those friends, loved ones, and even strangers that have provided me a pebble of light in the form of understanding and support. They've blessed my life, sometimes even more than they know. Seeing a little bright spot on the path has helped me to move forward when things are difficult. This show is here to celebrate those who add light to our lives. We'll share some of their stories as well as ways in which to light the paths of others. Please come find me on Instagram and Facebook at Pebbles of Light, as well as at ammaxon.com. I love having the opportunity to interact with you and hear about those who've added a pebble of light to your path. Enjoy the show. Hello, welcome to episode 28 of Pebbles of Light. Have you ever wondered what casting directors actually do? Today I've got the answer, but first, a quick word from this week's sponsor, followed by a review of the last episode. When determining what companies I would want to work with to help support the podcast, Shine Cosmetics was at the top of my list. I mean, even their name ties in with the idea of Pebbles of Light. The origin story of Shine is amazing. It started when a mom was helping her daughter get ready for a dance recital and realized that the names of the makeup in her bag sent a message that she didn't want her daughter to hear. At Shine, you get shades with names like Beloved, Majesty, Determined, Loyal, Valued, Courage, and Empowered. In addition, it's great makeup. It's the only makeup I buy. Head on over to Shine Cosmetics, and you can use code ANM10, that's Ann with an E, or click the link in the description for 10% off on some amazing makeup with a positive message and help support the podcast all at the same time. It's an awesome deal. Back to the show. The last episode was an interview with Drake Self and Lars Peterson, who are two people who have had such an influence in my life. I'm so grateful to them and their inspired friendship. For those that are new here, every episode has a pebble, which is just a call to action for that episode. Doing the interview with Lars and Drake, we realized how long it had been since we'd talked. I think it was close to 14 years, and how great it was to just kind of reconnect. So the pebble for that episode was to get in touch, whether in person, phone call, text, something, with someone who's been a pebble of light in your life, and I hope you've been able to do that. Connection with those that mean a lot to us is so important, especially as there's so many moving parts to life right now and there's a lot of uncertainty. Connect with those who mean the most to you. All right, back to the casting directors. I have an interview today with Beverly Holloway. Bev is a casting director who's worked on many faith-based films. Some of my favorites include The Ultimate Gift, Beyond the Mask, I Can Only Imagine, and the streaming series The Chosen. Being neighbors, we'd known each other in real life for quite a while, and I knew that she worked in the film industry, but I didn't know what all she did. It wasn't until we became Facebook friends, of all things, that I knew how much I appreciated the work that she did. She'd posted a link to a film that she'd done the casting for, and then I kind of stalked her a little bit, and I realized she'd done all these shows that I really love. So this interview is a great mix of learning a little bit more about what the film industry is like, faith in leading you to your vocation, and learning a little bit of behind-the-scenes tidbits about The Chosen. I hope you enjoy it. I am so grateful today to be talking with Beverly Holloway. She is a neighbor just down the street from me, and we've known each other for 3 years, almost exactly to the day. We're recording this at the end of October, and we met on Halloween 3 years ago. So I'm really grateful for the chance to hear from her today. And she's got such an amazing and diverse background. I'm going to have her kind of give a little bit of her background and share it with you.
It's so good to be here. It's very, very fun to connect with you this way. I am a casting director for independent film and TV. It actually wasn't my first career. I started in my 20s doing interior design and managed a showroom, a furniture sales showroom. So it was still creative, but I had grown up doing theater and discovered a love for musical theater, especially in high school, and kind of opened my eyes to a whole different side that I hadn't been exposed to before high school. All of a sudden, I was just enthralled with theater and acting and performing. I had also been a singer as well. And so that kind of opened up a world where all my loves were combined into one. But of course, we've all grown up with the okay, get a real job. So I got a real job to begin with, but I still just had that kind of ache inside to do something with the performing arts side of things. I know that to be God just kind of stirring that in me, because as I've come to kind of realize is that he created me to do what I'm doing. And so I just had that stirring and that idea of like, okay, is the design, that side of things, what I want to do for the next, I was in my 20s. So you think the next 40 plus years. And I wanted to at least give a shot at doing something more performing arts related. So I actually had a good friend that I went to church with who was a filmmaker. And he was kind of a pioneer in the Christian film world. He was one of the early filmmakers that was creating Christian films. And I asked if I could be an intern. So I kind of went backwards, quit the good paying job and decided to go and intern on this film set. And that was 27 and a half years ago now. And I just haven't turned back. So yeah, pretty amazing that opportunity led to a whole new career, and a career that I just feel is like so me, meaning what I was created to do, because I'm part business and I'm part creative, and it's really a mixture of both of those things. So
I love that idea of the spiritual hindsight, right? Where you get into the future and you kind of look back and you're like, oh, that was kind of that tipping point. I did an interview with some friends a while back where they had a similar thing. Like they were just living life and they decided one year, they're like, okay, our goal for the year is to just do whatever God wants us to do and pray about it. And one of the first things that they felt prompted to do was for her husband to quit his 6-figure job. And so they did it. They took the leap. They've done well. And it's such an inspiring example of God can do so much more with your life than you can. Like you can make all these plans, but you can recognize that he can do more with you than you ever could aspire to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it needed to go the way that it went. I think partially for my dad to eventually come around. I think because I had what he would call, quote unquote, a regular job for a while, he knew that I wasn't just sort of doing something on a whim. He knew that I had tried that route and I had gone that route and I could do it if I had to. And I think he knew that, so he wasn't quite as freaked out. He was freaked out, but not quite as freaked out as he might have been had I not kind of demonstrated that I knew what I was doing. I kind of knew how to run business. So I think that helped him just a little bit.
So how did that intern job lead into casting? In my mind, I don't even know how one would know if they're good at doing casting.
Yeah, you don't really know until you start doing it. And this is where I say it was totally a God thing, because my friend, I was willing to intern and do whatever, but he knew that I had an acting background. At that point, we went to a pretty large church in Southern California. I was directing and producing like full-scale musical productions at the church. And so he knew that I had that kind of skill set, which could go into a producing side, maybe a directing side, although I hadn't really wanted that in the film sense, because I didn't have the technical background to direct in film. But he needed someone to help him with casting. So when I interned, what I was interning on was a short film that was an outreach film created for Youth for Christ for a big kind of annual convention that they have called DCLA. It was a 30-minute film, and he hated casting because he hated to tell people no. He loved the actor part of it, but he hated the business side of it. He didn't like to have to tell people no or disappoint them or feel pressured. In those days with no budgets, you're working with a lot of people that you know. And when you go to church and people know that you're a filmmaker, he would get approached a lot by people at church. And so I just became that buffer for him so that he could just step out of it and say, hey, go see Bev, talk to Bev. Bev will tell you. And that kind of put a buffer between him and people that he knew so that he didn't feel kind of obligated or bad. Well, that's how it started. But I realized that I was I was good at it. And I don't say that in a prideful way. What I mean is that I had that mix of business and art that is necessary for casting. And so when I say good at it, I don't mean that in a like, oh, I'm so good. I just mean I had the right skill set for that position. For several years, I did all kinds of things. I continued to do other areas, but I was always casting alongside. And one by one, those other things kind of fell off and fell away, but casting stayed constant. And so eventually, then I just stuck with casting and have continued forward.
And then the projects started to get bigger and
Yes.
bigger. How does that work? I don't even know who's in charge of a film. If it's the director, the producer,
Producers.
If the producers seek you out, or do you kind of like, is there like a job board where they're like, we're looking for a casting director and you apply, or is it usually just kind of word of mouth connections in this small little community?
Yeah, it's both. There are job boards and networking groups, Facebook groups. I'm a part of Casting Society of America. And so producers can seek out people through that. They have their own website. And so there are ways to get connected for producers to get connected with a casting director. In my case, I ended up in a niche that wasn't really a niche back then, but has become a niche, which is the faith-based film world. So my friend, who's the filmmaker, his name's John Schmidt, wonderful, wonderful man. John always made Christian films. And like I said, he was a pioneer. There weren't a lot of people making them. So I think that's kind of how it happened for me. First of all, his project started to get a little bigger and a little bigger. And then we started making films for the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, kind of larger budget. Now, larger, I mean, instead of, $1.99, we actually had
not like Marvel.
No, exactly. I know. Those budgets were like Marvel's catering for a week, I think. But it was the first time I also worked with SAG, which is the Screen Actors Guild. So you were kind of jumping into a different level of actor. And then with that went their agents and their managers. And so it was a whole different level of talent and a different way of working with regards to the business side of things. So it just grew and grew. And because I did those films and there hadn't really been a casting director who was really consistently working in that field, I kind of became that, I think. I didn't set out to be that, but I kind of became known as that person who knows that market and that audience. And it matters because I know when we made the films for the Billy Graham ministry, there were things we had to be careful about as far as when we were casting. It mattered to them and to us as far as an actor's full body of work and the kinds of films that they were doing, and that there wasn't going to be a lot of edgier, maybe more questionable content. That was something they were consistently doing. And so we had to kind of look at that a little differently, not in a judgment way. Every artist is welcome to do whatever they want to do and choose to do for their career. But as far as the audience, we had to take that into consideration. And so I learned a lot about that and understanding what the faith audience or even the family-oriented audience really wanted and their expectations for them to feel comfortable. Because I think it has been a learning process for the audience as well to kind of trust. For a long time, I think entertainment and movies were a little like taboo. No, they're bad. The content isn't acceptable, or it's edgy, or it's too provocative. And then now we're saying, oh, no, we're creating films within that system, though, that you can trust and you can believe in, that you can watch with your family. And that was new, because before that, there wasn't, not only was there not just home entertainment was growing as a thing, because it used to be, churches would rent the big projectors and show them on their like church movie night. And now we were making content that they could get in their home on VHS and then DVD and all of that. So it was just a matter of understanding the audience, what they wanted, what they were gravitating towards, and then respecting that audience rather than, I think sometimes in mainstream media, there's a misunderstanding about the audience of faith. And I don't know that it's purposeful, but it comes off as kind of a lack of respect. So we were building something where we were saying, no, we respect the choices you're making for you and your family. We respect your faith choices. We want to honor that. We want to provide you with entertainment that encourages that and builds that and challenges that. And so that was all new. That was kind of a new concept back then. I feel like I sound like I'm so old. It was 27 years ago, but a lot has happened in those years. If you think about it, you think of big old VHS beta. No, it was beta tapes and then VHS and then DVDs, just a lot's happened. I just somehow grew with it and learned a lot. And so I think I ended up with a lot of knowledge that was helpful to producers. And so they would just keep calling and asking me to do my thing. So I kept doing it.
Looking back, like you were saying, being respectful of that audience, I feel like you can look back. I grew up, kind of in the 80s, thinking about mainstream media at that time. There was kind of a decline in values, I guess, is kind of the easier way to say it. And then I feel like more recently, that audience, that faith-based audience, has kind of said, no, we want content and we want quality content and engaging stories. And so I feel like the audience has kind of demanded that. And that's good because it gives even more people those opportunities of having faith-based films you feel comfortable sitting down and watching with your kids so that they can have something good to watch. And that gives a value system and teaches lessons that can help them gain really good insights about things. There's actually one of the films that you did is called The Ultimate Gift. And that's one of my favorites. I remember I was at a video rental place with a friend and we were trying to figure out what to rent that night. And we're like, oh, this looks kind of good. Like, it's got James Garner. Like, we'll see. So we grab it, we watched it and we loved it. And I was like, okay, I have to buy this now. So then, we've made it a family tradition that we watch it as a family around Christmas time.
Oh, I just love that.
But I feel like that was one of those ones where you're like, okay, like this is a great film and you can learn so much and good messages in it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because having recognizable actors like James Garner or Brian Dennehy are a key piece of the casting process. Now, not every film has the budget to be able to allow for that. And not every film wants that. There are indies and subject matters to where they don't really want that to be the driving force. So there are exceptions, but what we'll call mainstream secular actors are an important part of the casting process because they do get, just like you're like, oh, it's James Garner. I know that actor. Okay, I'll go ahead and watch this. Had he not been in it, you probably wouldn't have picked it up. Because you wouldn't have known who it was or what the story was. And so, that's always been a really important and challenging part of my work is marrying the mainstream elements of entertainment that we need to work within and the pieces that we need to incorporate into faith films without in any way compromising like the film or the story or the message or the purpose behind it. You are a perfect example of why we need to and oftentimes do cast recognizable names is because it makes a difference in the audience's perception of a film being quote unquote real.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this is a real Hollywood movie.
Yeah. Or a decent budget. You're like, oh, I can imagine that would be difficult because not only do you have to, like you talked about kind of the reputation, a wholesome reputation, I guess we'll say, of the actor or the actress. You have to make sure that you're finding someone with that and also someone who's willing. Do you ever get pushback where people are like, oh, this is a faith-based film. That's not really my thing?
All the time. All the time.
Really?
Yeah. And that's fine. I respect everybody has a choice for what they want to do and the kind of work they want to do. These stories are not for everybody, and that's fine. So we'll oftentimes reach out to people and they'll just come back very respectfully, but come back and say, no, I didn't really connect with this material.
Yeah.
No one ever comes back and says, oh, I don't agree with this, or, you're wrong, or I don't like this message. Or I think most everyone actually, whether they are a person of faith or not, can see value in putting out messages of hope and encouragement and inspiration into the world. So oftentimes when someone does decide to sign on, if they're not a person of faith, it's strictly because they appreciate having positive messages or challenging messages or inspirational stories out there in the world, because they make a positive footprint in people's lives. And so they want to be a part of that. So not everyone that works in the films are people of faith. A lot of them are, or a lot of them have a heritage of faith. They grew up going to church or some level of faith as they grew up. Sometimes they just connect with it. James Garner did Ultimate Gift because he knew he was towards the end of his career. In fact, I think it ended up being his last film, but he did it for his grandkids. He loved the message of it and wanted to leave something positive for his grandkids. So that's why he did it.
That's so fitting with the character in the film too. It's just perfect.
Exactly. So people do it for all sorts of reasons. Tim Conway was the same way. We did an animated series that Tim Conway was the voice of one of our lead characters. And he did it for his grandkids, just to have some fun and something that they would like and enjoy and could watch. So yeah, actors do it for a lot of different reasons.
That's awesome. Is it the Hermie series? Is that right?
It
Tim
is,
Conway?
yeah.
I'm going to have to introduce it to my dad. He can pretend he's one of Tim Conway's grandkids. Be like, Dad,
yes,
this is for you.
I really loved the early episodes. Eventually it went on and I had to step back and wasn't actively casting the newer episodes. But the first, I think it was 5 or 6, we just ended up with great people. So we had Tim Conway and Don Knotts are the 2 lead worms, Hermie and Wormy. And they are just awesome. Their voices are so iconic.
Oh,
and
yes.
They are just awesome. And then we had Vicki Lawrence came on and did.
It was a Carol Burnett Show reunion.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And just several other really iconic actors. It was super fun. Voiceover is a fun way because they're so relaxed. They're in their booth and casual clothes, and super fun.
I would be so intimidated to meet Tim Conway and Don Knotts, especially together, because they're so witty. Do you know?
Yes,
I don't know.
Yes.
Be like, I don't know. I'm not going to laugh at the right jokes. I'm going to mess it up.
It's interesting because early on, I used to get pretty intimidated, and sometimes I still do. Not starstruck is the wrong word, but I guess it is a little bit of starstruck. But I also recognize they just want to be treated normally. You know what I mean? So I've never asked for an autograph. I don't have an autograph from some of these iconic actors because I've just been like, okay, I'll just keep this professional. I want them to feel like they can trust me and that I'm not like fangirling them. And that's probably more my thing than theirs. Nobody's ever kind of made me feel like I need to do that, but that's just a choice that I always made. But on Hermie, the producers ended up creating a limited edition of some of the animations and had Don and Tim sign them, and I have one of those. So I did end up with their autographs. It's on my wall in my office in LA.
We should mention that quickly. So I live in Boise. Many listeners will know that. I said that Bev lives down the street, but her office is in LA. So do you want to talk a little bit about the change in your commute over the past few years?
Ironically, the commute time actually isn't all that different. I moved here about 3.5 years ago. I grew up my whole life in Southern California, but my sister had moved here 23 years ago. So I was always in LA and she was here in Boise. So we would visit a lot. But because of the industry I was in, I never really thought about moving. I lived in Orange County as opposed to LA proper, so my office is in Culver City. Towards the last several years, the commute just was getting longer and longer. So most days it would be an hour and a half was kind of the standard each way. And ironically, the flight from Boise to LA, which is 10 minutes from my office, the flight is only 90 minutes. So
there you go.
Yeah, exactly. So it really, as far as that commute, it's really, really simple. But I have the added quality of life is that I get to do life with my sister and my brother-in-law and my niece. It just became a time where that was of greater importance to me than kind of what it might do to my career. I've been super fortunate to be doing this a long time. And I felt absolutely assured by God that this move was something I was supposed to do. In fact, so much so that I didn't even really know why. I didn't know. I just had this compelling sense of move now. Now's the time to move. And I kept saying, I was asking friends, would you pray for me? Because I feel really strongly, but it also seems crazy to me because I'm still working, I still working in this industry, and people will think I'm crazy moving to Boise. And yeah, still nobody said, God told me you're not supposed to go. We just plowed ahead. Then when I got here, within 2 months, it became so apparent, so obvious to me why God compelled me to move then. And it was a part of his provision. It was a part of his protection and his provision for me and for my life. And I've stayed consistently busy. If there's anything positive to come out of the pandemic, is that people have learned they can work differently. And I think finding colleagues, the entertainment business is notorious for really long hours, and it just work, work, work. And I was always different that way because I lived in Orange County. I didn't do the going to a screening every night and parties every night, meeting people, socially for drinks or, whatever. That wasn't a part of my existence because I didn't live right there. And that was purposeful. I needed a separation between kind of that Hollywood identity versus a more grounded, just for me, for who I am. I know I can tend to get really caught up and just 100% into whatever I'm doing. And I knew that if I lived in that environment as well, I might kind of find myself swallowed up a bit by it and losing a sense of okay, my real identity, who God says I am, as opposed to my latest success or sort of the entertainment industry's definition of success or value, which is very skewed from God's sense of value.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. So, I purposely had stayed kind of out of that. So I would work from home, but I wouldn't tell anybody because, again, you were supposed to be in your office in LA working. Well, then pandemic hit and all these people in the industry are realizing, oh, I can be home and have dinner with my family. Oh, I can run and pick up my kids from school and still work. And they're just realizing there is, I think, a better work-life balance. And now working remotely is pretty standard. So the first year I lived here in Boise, I didn't tell anybody. I told a few producers that I was actively working with, but I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell agents, just because the perception would be that I wasn't in it, that I wasn't, currently in it, that I had kind of stepped back. It's like, no, there's computers and remote working. Well, now I can tell people and they're like, oh, that's great. They just accept it. They understand that working remotely is a thing. So that's been great.
So doing remote casting, is that a little bit different than seeing somebody in person? Because I feel like you would obviously get a feel for what they look like, but can you catch on to kind of the countenance of an actor?
Yeah, well, and ideally, we want to go back to in-person casting. So what I was doing the year and a half before the pandemic hit is that I would just commute to LA, like we talked about. So I would do all of the in-person casting and sessions, which was great, and it was nice because then I could go every trip. I would go and make sure I made it to the water and the ocean, and those few little things. But the pandemic is what has stopped that. Now, again, another positive is that technology caught up with the needs of the pandemic, basically. Zoom has grown as far as their technology and interfaces tremendously because they had to. All of a sudden, everyone was using those platforms. And there are specific online platforms like that specifically for casting. And basically, they just grew to meet the need. The plus of that is that actors aren't having to run around town. When Actors Day, especially in LA, they were literally driving all day around town, cross town, which there were times when it took me an hour to go somewhere that was about 12 miles away. I know, it's crazy. And so that's what the actors did every day, all day long, was just drive around, traffic, park, all of that. The self-tape has allowed them to have a little more control over that, to be able to do the first reads on tape. And I think that's probably how it's going to stay. Once we're out of the crisis of the pandemic and can go back to some in-person casting, then I think we'll start picking up on what we call the callback. That way, you don't have actors that are driving across town only to walk in the room and I know instantly that they're not right, and I hated that for them, especially because I know they're trying to make it 12 different places in one day. So there are some pluses that came out of that I think we are going to continue to carry, which is the self-tape auditions for actors, but nothing replaces the in-person completely. So I think it'll be a hybrid when we're out of sort of the pandemic protocols. I think it'll be a hybrid of what we used to do and what happened through the pandemic.
Yeah, you kind of, I don't know, like I love grocery pickup now, whereas before I never did it. And now I'm like, can we just keep this for always? Like, I like this. There's another project that you've done that has become a family favorite called The Chosen. And you and I have talked about this quite a bit. Yeah. How is that casting process when you're, well, I'll let you give a little background on The Chosen first, and then we'll talk about it.
Well, yeah, The Chosen, it came out of a short film Dallas Jenkins did for his church. So he, at that time, was on staff at a church as their visual media director. He had done some films, but he had one that he had really high hopes for. And I guess by Hollywood standards, it failed, meaning it didn't get the box office response that they were hoping for. And so you kind of go from hero to zero as far as Hollywood is concerned. It's so common, it really is very much like, what have you done lately? And you're kind of only as good as your last success or failure. And he has a tremendous heart for God, and he opted to go on staff at a church, and he created a short film for their Christmas Eve service called The Shepherd. And from that, they began to talk about, well, what would it look like if we kept going? If we kept this kind of approach to the story, because the shepherd, we don't know much about the actual shepherds that went and saw the baby Jesus. So he imagined, given cultural knowledge, historical knowledge, given facts that we do know, imagined what it could have been like for this shepherd, this one particular shepherd. So then he took that concept to, okay, well, what if we did that about the disciples and the life of Jesus? So it's interesting because The Chosen really is about the chosen. It's not about Jesus necessarily. Obviously, Jesus is at the center of everything, but the story is being told from the perspective of his followers and how it has impacted their life and how they are walking that path. Because I think what happens is we forget that they're just regular human beings that Jesus called, like like all of us, but they weren't superheroes. They weren't, the minute he called them, instantly sinless or no longer susceptible to temptation or to anger or to jealousy or to pride. Those are all a part of who we are as humans. And so it's interesting to look at that journey as their lives are transformed by Jesus and being in the presence of Jesus as they are dealing with the same things we do, right? Because as a Christian, I want to allow Jesus to transform me. I don't want to be a person of jealousy or of pride or of anger, but it's a process for me. It's a process for God to pull that from me and sometimes I'm doing great. And then other times, I think, oh, I got this handled. And then, what pride cometh before a fall.
Yeah.
And so it's just an interesting journey of watching their transformation as humans, just like us, to navigate what it is that God's telling them. It's new to them. Concepts are new. They're different. It's a different way of thinking and of operating and of living. It's a different priority system and a different value system. Well, those are all the same things that we're dealing with too as Christians. So we're basically walking the journey with them that so many of us actually are walking and have walked. That's what makes it different, is it's through the eyes of the humans, as opposed to, because none of us could really look through the eyes of Jesus, because he's perfect. He's God. I can't really fathom. So it's really wonderful walking through it through the eyes of other humans as they encounter him and experience his ministry.
And I love how the disciples have kind of their own characteristics. We're actually rewatching it together as a family. And we watched The Wedding Gift last night was the episode that we watched. And I love the beginning of that one where Simon Peter's talking to his wife and he's like, no, like really, this is the Messiah. You can see Peter's courageous and dedication and somewhat just a little bit overconfident in some things. You can see that in this character as well. And it just kind of builds on it and gives him greater depth for me anyway.
Yeah.
So when you're casting that, is that interesting because you're casting characters who all of the Christian world has some perception of what these characters would look like or be like or all these different things. And to be honest, in some of the cases, I feel like Dallas kind of turns things on its side and it's like, think about Matthew as someone who's maybe a little bit autistic, but what is that like to cast a character that everybody has a preconceived idea of what that character would be like?
Yeah, casting those characters, it's interesting because I think people of faith or people who have read the scriptures a lot and read those stories, certainly the Gospels, feel like they know the disciples, they know these characters. But in reality, we don't really know anything other than what's briefly said in the scripture. But I think we all kind of put our own sense of who these people are and even what they look like. Of course, we've seen other movies and shows that have portrayed the disciples. So I think there's a little bit of all of those pieces that people have in their brains as far as who these disciples are, what they look like. One of the things I was really happy about that was a priority for Dallas, and of course then became a priority for the casting team, is the diversity of it. For a long time, I think we did sort of Caucasianize the disciples and even Jesus. And so having that diversity of look was important to really be more conscientious about that part of the world and what the generations look like who would have come from that part of the world. That was important when we were creating the look. For example, the guy playing Simon is actually Israeli. So that was a bonus. We didn't cast him because of that, but it certainly colored his portrayal of the character and just gave it a richness and a depth to it. We've been super fortunate that way as we've been casting. So I think we didn't so much take into account what people might think they should look like. In fact, Dallas was all for challenging that in many ways. Like you said, let's think differently, get ready for different or get used to different. But we wanted to be mindful historically and culturally to that portrayal. And the characters themselves, in some ways, have grown as the actors have been cast in the roles. You know what I mean? Like, because part of what an actor in any piece brings a piece of their own experience or their own self to the character. So I think a lot of these characters have come to life even more so as the actors are living in them. That's been super interesting to watch and to kind of see that grow over time. And the actors, of course, are getting more grounded in who these people are. I think seeing them in a much more 360 way. When we did season 1, we did 4 episodes and then stopped and then went back and did the second 4. So they were actually in 2 different time periods that those were produced. We did the first 4 to see, like, is anyone going to watch this? Like, let's see what happens. And then, of course, it just caught the attention of people and really resonated with people. So then we jumped into the second 4 episodes of season 1. And the difference even between the actors' connection from those first 4 to the second 4, they had time to live with them and think about that and to understand what it was we were doing. We were kind of doing something different that everyone was sort of figuring out. These characters are iconic, but we still don't know a ton about them. And the idea of Matthew, so I think Dallas has shared this before. One of his kids is on the spectrum, and he thinks that he possibly is on the spectrum somewhere. And so just being open to the thought of that, his thinking was, do we know for sure that Matthew was like, no, we don't, but we don't know he isn't. We know his character traits, and those character traits could conceivably fit someone who is on the spectrum. And so let's explore that. Let's see what that looks and feels like. And it's been tremendous, the feedback and the comments. People who have kids that are on the spectrum or who themselves are on the spectrum, that the idea of seeing a follower of Jesus, this iconic person, Matthew, as someone who has similar traits to them is amazing. Like, they realize there's no different. God can call me and I can do great things. God called Matthew. He did great things. You know what I mean? There's not a sense of like, oh, I'm not good enough, or God couldn't use me because I have these certain traits. It's like, no, we're showing you a world where it's all there. Like you said, Simon has his sort of struggle with pride and with anger, and so do I. So, I can watch that journey and feel like, okay, we can do this. Like, God's called us as humans. These weren't a select set of 12 people who were superhuman. So I think that was a really important part of the casting, is that these were people who we really related to. Some of them are people of faith themselves, some are not. They're relating to the characters on a human level. And in many ways, for those who aren't people of faith, they're experiencing the transformation from their time with Jesus as they're acting these scenes, if that makes sense, as they process, okay, how would I respond to this and to this man, and who is this man? They're asking all these questions as a character, but they're also asking them personally as well, kind of going through that journey as well. So it's been really wonderful. That casting process. It's hard because, as you know, the bar is set really high as far as performance goes. So we search high and low. That's why we brought a couple actors from Europe now. We have actor from Australia. We're going to find them wherever we need to find them just to make sure that it's right. It's a pretty intense process. And season 2, with the introduction of Judas, I think we threw everyone a curveball in the way that was cast, but I love it. I totally love it. Because again, it isn't like Judas didn't have a big letter B for betrayer from the very beginning. The disciples had to have actually been friends with him and had meals with him, and they worked together side by side for a while before that all happened. So he can't be all bad that way.
Yeah, we were actually, I guess it was probably last Easter, we were doing a study as a family, and we were talking about, how do you think the other disciples felt? When just trying to explore that idea and thinking about it. So I love that. So with The Chosen, was there kind of a point, was it maybe after the reception of those first 4 episodes where you're like, all right, we've got something here. We've got an audience who's passionate about this project and wants to see more.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. After those first 4 and the screenings and then putting them out, it just instantly seemed to resonate in a very strong way. And not just strong, but people were willing to support it. And that's a unique thing on this one, is that it's very, very much audience supported through program, what we call Pay It Forward, but also through merchandise. Every bit of that goes back to help make the show happen. And it's unheard of, the amount of support that the audience has given. It's tremendous. They're called the Chosen Army, just really, really faithful and supportive and encouraging. They want these stories. And I continue to have my friends and people that I know who are Christians and people of faith who have avoided, quote unquote, Jesus stories just because they haven't always been portrayed in a way that is compelling. And so they're kind of like, yeah, I don't really do the Bible story thing. And then they start watching it and they realize, oh, this is different. But to this day, I still have people and I just tell them, just watch an episode, decide for yourself. I haven't had anyone so far who's like, yeah, no. So it's super exciting that way that it has resonated so strongly. And, I do think another very unique thing about this is that it is across faiths. So in the advisory council and in the research council that Dallas put together, there was a Catholic priest, there was a Jewish rabbi, there was a Christian faith historian. There's all sorts of people who are speaking to this coming from a different specific faith background, but the commonality is the fact that it's Jesus and his ministry and his disciples, which is what we share in common, right? So we can all be brought together by our common belief in who Jesus was and who he is and his importance in our life, that he is our savior. That is a common thread through, obviously not of the Jewish culture, but for those who have since found the Messiah and are now Jewish believers. But the Jewish culture and understanding that and honoring that is a really important piece of this as well. So in order to portray that in a real way, Dallas and the writers had to really understand Jewish culture and Jewish culture at that time. It's been super interesting on that front. And part of the seasons were shot in Utah, on set in Goshen, Utah, that is actually owned by the LDS Church, which you are a part of, and a lot of the leadership of the Angel Studios that produces The Chosen. Several of those leaders are also a part of the LDS Church. So it's a really interesting coming together of faiths and different avenues of faith that traditionally don't always come together. But we do have that in common. Jesus is at the center of it, and his ministry and his importance in our life is at the center of it all. So that's our common point, that's the most important common point.
I feel like, especially just with everything going on in the world, the importance of people of faith, whatever that faith may be, working together and coming together and recognizing that we really have a lot more in common than we have differences, and helping people recognize.
It's been great for me too. I'm a part of the audience just as much as I am someone who works on it. I watch the episodes, and so when I'm working in it, obviously I'm a little more in the minutia of things, and I read the scripts in a more analytical way towards whatever goal we're after. But there is a point when they come out that I actually just watch them as an audience member and incredibly touched by them and challenged by them. There was a scene, the scene in, I don't know which episode of season 2, but it's where Jesus has been basically sitting and receiving a whole line of people who want to be healed, who want to speak to him and touch him. And he's there all day long. And meanwhile, the disciples are kind of doing their business and kind of trying to keep the line. And then at the end of the episode, he just walks past them exhausted. That is so powerful to me. Just that realizing that at that point in his ministry, he was a human. So the toll that would have taken physically on him to do that all day, again, it just kind of goes towards the sacrifice that he went through for us, and to receive each of those people and give 100% of himself that whole day. And meanwhile, the disciples were over there like squabbling over something petty, and he walks by and he's just drained, and it just makes you realize, okay, all right, let's put these things in perspective. There are things that are really important, and there are things that just aren't.
Yeah. Doesn't Mary, his mother, get up at that point and go over and kind of help?
Yeah.
I love watching. So like I said, we just watched the wedding gift episode, and that feeds into that relationship as well, that mother-son relationship, and just getting to gain kind of a deeper understanding of that as well. And it's just such a great show to watch with a spiritual lens, and let those things that feel true to you kind of move into you and add to your story and your understanding.
Yeah.
So the last question on Pebbles of Light is always the same. And the purpose of the podcast is to celebrate those relationships that have helped brighten our path and in turn help us to light the path of others. Could you share about 1 or 2 people who have placed a pebble of light in your path?
Well, there have actually been many. I spoke earlier about the filmmaker, John Schmidt, that I went to initially and asked if I could intern. He is, gosh, it's hard to call him a pebble. He's kind of a boulder. Yes, a boulder of light in my life. I literally wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it weren't for his willingness to kind of take a chance and have me work with him. I'm forever grateful for him. And there have been many others. There's some that have been, earlier on in time. My sister is, again, hard to call her a pebble, but she's the reason I'm a Christian. She's the reason I found my faith, which she came to faith before I did, and kind of drugged me along because I always wanted to hang with my sister, but she would go to church, the high school group, on Wednesday nights, and there was a junior high group. And so I kind of just went along and started going to the junior high group and went to summer camp and then got baptized. And that was because of her sharing that with me and allowing me to be a part of her journey. And so she's a huge pebble of light for me. The person that really led me to the Lord is her. Currently, there's a friend of mine, her name's Sherry Rigby. She has a group called Women in My World, and she started this group a few years ago, but it's just growing and growing. She is such an encouragement. It's interesting because she felt called to move to LA. She's an actress, and so she thought for sure that's what God was calling her to LA to do. But instead, he really called her to be an encouragement to other women in the industry. So Sherry is an actress, beautifully talented, has been the lead in several movies, a couple of which I've had the pleasure of casting. And she's great. But at her core, she wants to encourage and uplift other women and kind of help walk alongside of them in their faith journey, just in their human journey. And she's a huge pebble of light. She's a real encouragement to me. And I can be myself with her, and I can be flawed with her. She's just really someone special. And there are many others. I'm super fortunate. Every producer I get to work with, like right now, I'm working on several projects, all of which are producers that I've had the pleasure of working with before and who have become my friends. That each one of them is a pebble of light to me, that are filmmakers I respect in the way that they, live their life with their families and the way that they make their families a priority, and yet they're still doing, really good work within the entertainment space as well. But I'm super fortunate that I have a lot of pebbles of light. Yeah. I'm
and
really
that you can
fortunate.
recognize them, right?
Yeah. But I love that you asked that question, because I love stopping and going, gosh, I have a lot of, it makes me super grateful.
Awesome. Thank you for taking time to chat today. It's been so fun to talk about things that we don't use. Well, I guess sometimes we talk about this when we see each other get in the mail, but to talk about it a little bit more in depth. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and the producers, like you'd said, those producers that you're working with who are trying to continue to push forward that light into mainstream media. So thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for letting me. And this was super fun. And I look forward to meeting in the middle of the street.
I hope you love the insights shared by Bev. I'm so grateful that she's my neighbor. And my kids would be so sad if I did this whole episode and didn't give a quick shout out to Bev's adorable puppy, Rudy. Rudy is the cutest little pup, and my boys just love to go and play with him. When I asked Bev about her commute time from LA to Boise during the interview, I was thinking in my head that it's not a very related topic to discuss. I wonder why I feel like I'm bringing it up. But in doing so, Bev was able to share about when she felt compelled to move to Boise. She said, quote, "I felt absolutely assured by God that this move was something I was supposed to do. In fact, so much so that I didn't even really know why. I was asking friends, would you pray for me? Because I feel really strongly, but it also seems crazy to me. Then when I got here, within 2 months, it became so apparent, so obvious to me why God compelled me to move then. It was part of his protection and his provision for me and for my life," end quote. Revisiting her story when I edited this episode came exactly as I was moving forward with something that in my brain felt crazy, but in my heart I knew it was right. Her story helped me to remember to be confident in the heart feeling and have faith that the logical brain side of things would make sense eventually. Keeping with that idea, the pebble for this episode is to reflect on one of my favorite scriptures. It's Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, which states, quote, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths," end quote. What are ways that you can more fully live the principles found in that scripture? Be sure to check the full show notes for links and references and how to support the podcast from this episode. As always, I'd love if you could leave a positive review. The next episode features an interview with my friend Natalie Hobbs. Natalie shares her experience about learning about her son's Down syndrome diagnosis and the joy she has found with him in her life. Until then, keep looking for the bright spots on your path, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for tuning in today. More than what has been said, I hope that you've been able to listen to your thoughts and feelings. Maybe you've thought of someone who's brought light to your path. Let them know of your gratitude. Maybe you've been inspired as to how to add some light to your own path or the path of another. Do your best to act on those feelings and impressions. I would love to learn more about you and your experiences. Please come find me on Instagram and Facebook at Pebbles of Light. If you like what you hear, please review so we can spread this light further. You can find show notes and more resources at ammaxon.com. Until next time.